And I did not expect that you would start sharing policy positions and recommendations for the future that got me fired up in like my leftist part of my brain.
Greetings, Rick Reinierson here. I'm making this video to refute the latest defamation spread by Houston Wade on a socialist podcast called Pillow Scream, which is associated with people I've engaged in the realm of ideas previously. It's not a neutral discussion, as will be made obvious. I'll keep this fairly straightforward to simply provide truthful information about each of Wade's defamatory false comments, and at some point I'll discuss Mandy, Alex, and Jim and their new friend Houston Wade more broadly.
But Mandy mentioned stalking, and I completely forgot to write that down. You mentioned a stalker too.
Oh, I have a stalker.
Yeah, what's that about?
So he's a serial stalker.
It's important to note that when Houston Wade says stalker, what he means is somebody criticizing either him or somebody that he likes. If you're thinking of stalking as hiding in the bushes or putting a horse's head in someone's bed or that kind of thing, that's not what Wade means. A stalker to him is someone who criticizes him or one of his radical leftist friends, people like politician Clarence Morawaki, who made the same stalking argument when he dragged me into court unsuccessfully to try to silence my right to criticize him to the public. By the way, Houston Wade was also in the courtroom supporting his failed Mussolini-esque attempt to silence criticism. Here's a tiny bit of Wade's friend defining what he means by the term stalker.
This is a news report. This is the Associated Press report. This has been carried around the country. I'd like to draw your attention to the very last paragraph in this article. And its key is Mr. Reinierson, and I'll read it. He took the page down, that page about me, from the temporary order, and ceased proceeding to criticize me. In response to the temporary protection order, he said in that declaration, but he, Reinierson, would like to resume the online criticism. He intends to continue the online harassment.
He's a far right-wing...
Wade calls me far right-wing. His socialist hosts don't ask him to define what far right-wing means or for evidence of this claim, and of course Wade provides none. Given that I've only voted for a Republican for president once in my life, Ron Paul, and given that I not only voted for Obama, but gave him a max campaign contribution and saw him on the campaign trail in San Marcos, Texas, while literally wearing the t-shirt, and even flew to Washington, D.C. to attend his inauguration, it's unlikely that I could be considered far right-wing. Wade himself is fond of sharing this picture of me holding a sign advocating for blocking Trump's ability to detain Americans without charge or trial. Houston Wade has no concern for what is true. He literally just makes up claims, and in this podcast, he continues his caricature with the following defamatory comments.
Neo-Nazi.
Wade dishonestly calls me a neo-Nazi, and yet again, his socialist hosts don't ask for any evidence for that extreme claim. I'm not a neo-Nazi, nor have I ever been one. It's important to realize that when Wade calls someone a Nazi or a white supremacist, what he means is they are a conservative, or someone who doesn't have his extreme leftist views.
White supremacist.
Wade falsely calls me a white supremacist, and yet again, his socialist hosts don't ask for any evidence for this incredible claim. I could point out speeches I've given against racism since my time in high school, the fact that I'm a retired military officer, or I could subject myself to childish giggles where I had to mention my many non-white friends or the fact that I was the best man in my buddy's wedding. Yeah, let me go ahead and insert the argument for you. Oh, he's using the I have black friends argument. That must mean he's a racist. Look, I don't care what stupid things you're reading to get these dumb remarks from. If somebody has black friends and they're in his wedding and he returns the favor and he's in their wedding, he's probably not David Duke. I'm pretty sure if you go back 100 years, you're not going to find any white supremacists that are in the wedding party.
And he has a history of stalking. So he's an Air Force veteran.
Ooh.
And while he was in the Air Force, he crossed a border checkpoint and refused to roll down his window. And so the Border Patrol was like, hey, man, ID, driver's license. He was like, no.
That's not what happened. And viewers can find the video to see exactly what did happen, should they want to watch for themselves. I'll provide one clip of the video where I asked the Border Patrol agents if they wanted passports, and they refused to take them. And then I'll follow it up with Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals Judge Jennifer Elrod explaining what happened during oral argument. You'll note it's nothing like what Houston Wade just said.
You think that I'm not an American citizen, is what you're telling me.
Well, define what that means.
You have a military ID.
That doesn't mean anything.
You have this ID.
Those aren't immigration documents.
Do you want a passport?
Are you a U.S. citizen?
I am a U.S. citizen.
You wouldn't answer me earlier.
You never asked me if I was a U.S. citizen.
The gentleman was not answering any questions. I mean, he said...
That's not true, counsel, is it? He never once did not answer a question posed to him, did he, counsel? There is not a single incident where he was asked a question and did not pose it. He immediately produced his identification at minute 11 after he realized that that identification wasn't satisfactory, offered to produce 2 passports. That offer was not taken up, and then there was silence. I don't understand what he did that contributed to the lengthy time that they just sat there.
And there's like a huge standoff between him and Border Patrol. Eventually they arrested him or something.
Houston Wade is fond of the false claim that I was arrested during the incident, despite being corrected on that claim, and despite the video showing that I was not arrested. It's noteworthy that his socialist hosts, who are associated with Veterans for Peace, find it giggle-worthy that somebody would exercise their rights in the face of armed federal agents. The ACLU flew me to Washington, D.C. to talk with some congressmen about this incident that Houston and his new friends find laughable.
And they probably realize that what they're doing is probably not having a real impact on the mission.
Once you start exerting your rights, though, once you started claiming the rights that you have, do you think then, though, things changed and they went a little deeper into hassling you or harassing you?
Yes, sir, I do. I believe that they, they'd pulled me aside. They would secondary me. It was because I had, said no to them. Never mind the fact that I've answered every other question that has to do, that's relevant, but not wanting to tell them, what I intend to do over the weekend, just that little bit offended them. So then I started to get the, lectures, you're the only pilot from the base who won't answer our questions, or, why won't you just tell us this, that, and the other? And then it became apparent to me that I was becoming known to agents there, so it started to just kind of get worse and worse.
Well, I want to apologize on behalf of the federal government for them doing that to you. They shouldn't have. Yeah. And so, again, I appreciate your service and thank you for being here.
Also, well, who was it who mentioned that the agents of the CBP wrote to the military, Mr. Ryerson, wrote to your military commander? Mr. Tomczyk, is it within the purview of the proper duties of a CBP official to write to military commanders or private employers about the conduct of, with allegations about the conduct of people who pass through a checkpoint?
Absolutely not, sir. It makes no sense to me whatsoever.
So they have no authority to do that?
I am not aware of any such authority.
Mr. Ryerson, to your knowledge, was any action taken against these agents for going way beyond their authority in order to hurt somebody?
No, sir, there was no action taken to my knowledge.
And he sued for false imprisonment in federal court, and the federal court was like, no, get the hell out of here. So he appealed, and then those judges were like, no. So he appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's like, we're not going to look at this, dude. Like, just roll down your window and give him your ID.
Supreme Court refuses to hear the vast majority of cases brought before it, and it made no statement whatsoever about why it didn't grant cert in my case, despite Houston Wade's false claim about their rationale.
America does need to police our border. Rick Rainierson understands that. He's an Air Force pilot who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now he's based in Texas, where he found he had to pass through checkpoints all the time.
There's no way to leave the border town without going through a checkpoint.
The checkpoint he had to pass through most often is 67 miles from the border.
I started to feel like I was asking permission to leave that town. I'm just traveling in the United States. I haven't crossed any borders, and I didn't really like that feeling.
So he installed cameras in his car.
Because I wanted to be able to prove the truth of events.
I've asked them if I'm free to go. I've asked them if they're detaining me. They won't answer any questions.
Here he's on the phone with a lawyer.
They're now standing around without telling me anything.
So if it was your job to be a border guard and somebody wouldn't answer questions, wouldn't you want to detain them?
Well, you might want to, but unless you have reasonable suspicion for a crime...
I'm suspicious because he won't answer questions.
Lack of cooperation cannot be used as a basis for reasonable suspicion. This is a person who's having to stop in the middle of a road, who's done nothing wrong, and finds himself surrounded by armed government agents with dogs.
The Border Patrol would not respond to our questions about this. So Congressman Peter King defended the agency. I think of Border Patrol as Border Patrol. These are inland. Isn't there something un-American about 100 miles from the border, American citizens having to prove we're Americans just to drive to work or the grocery store?
We live in a very upsetting world. You always have to balance the equities.
Americans have the right to be free in their own country, to drive within their own country. Real freedom lies in the thin space that separates an American citizen from an armed member of their government.
That thin line keeps getting thinner.
So he started stalking the Border Patrol guys and the federal judges who ruled against him.
Houston Wade's claim that I stalked the Border Patrol or federal judges is false and indicated by Houston Wade having no evidence for his claim. It's worth repeating, however, that Houston Wade uses the term stalking, just like his politician friend Morawaki, to mean publicly criticizing.
And that's, I mean, he may have been a stalker man before that, but that's his initiation into stalking. And he in his mind, we call him Constitution Jesus, because in his mind he feels like he's like the free speech savior of America.
Oh no! Are you describing my entire family?
It's only like his speech that's free.
Houston Wade claims my free speech activism is limited to my own speech. He fails to mention that after his politician friend unsuccessfully dragged me into court and tried to silence my criticism, that another Bainbridge Islander dragged Houston Wade into court and tried to silence Houston's speech by equating it with cyberstalking. Not only does Houston Wade fail to mention that, but he also fails to mention that I filed an amicus brief in support of Houston Wade's First Amendment right to criticize others online. The fact that my arguments carried the day for Houston in court, however, doesn't keep him from claiming that I'm only concerned with my right to free speech.
Everyone else is a fascist of some kind, even though he's like literally an oath keeper and neo-Nazi.
As previously stated, I'm not a neo-Nazi, and of course Wade provides no evidence for his false claim. His claim that I'm an oath keeper stems from him reading a blog post from more than a decade ago, where I explained how that group was recommended to me, how I was concerned about the group being too nutty, but after researching them, how I determined that the group was not, as it was demonized by the Southern Poverty Law Center. My blog post mentions that I joined the group, but left it a year later because I had a disagreement with the group's leadership. The blog post doesn't mention the reason. The disagreement I had was the group not distancing itself from Sheriff Richard Mack, who endorsed Mitt Romney for president, despite Romney's support for using military drones to assassinate American citizens. Which brings us to Houston Wade's next false claim.
Dude. And
it's a mark of a well-examined life right there.
How he started stalking me was several iterations of stalking later. So he claimed all these stories about how he was ordered to assassinate an American citizen and refused the order. And then
Houston Wade has repeatedly made the false claim that I did not refuse to assassinate an American citizen. In this podcast, however, he attributes that claim to somebody else, which we'll discuss here in a moment.
Lost his security clearance as a result. And
Houston Wade has also said on multiple occasions that I lost my security clearance in the military, which is a strange claim to make at the same time he denies my refusal to assassinate an American. Regardless, I didn't lose my security clearances, but rather they were suspended pending an investigation after I refused the unlawful order. What Wade fails to mention is the Air Force found for me during the investigation and highlighted how I am, quote, fully aware of the U.S. Constitution, unquote, and how I object to the violation of my rights or the rights of other American citizens. And with that finding, the Air Force denied the request to revoke my security clearances. They were unsuspended, and I went on to use my top secret and other clearances in an assignment in Korea before being rewarded with a great flying assignment flying the T-6 on the beaches of Florida for 3 years before I retired.
We didn't know it at the time, but Cannon would actually lead to the most significant achievement of Rhino's career, which was, somewhat ironically, documented in a letter of reprimand. This is a long story, but it's an important one, and although I know that many of you know parts of it, no summation of Rhino's career would be complete without it, so I will relay it to you now. In the spring of 2011, Rhino went into work, and when he heard what the mission was, he concluded that it violated the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment provides no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. No person. He informed leadership of his objection. He was switched to another mission, and for several months thereafter, he continued to fly other missions. He was just scheduled on other missions.
The Jonas brothers are here. They're out there somewhere. Sasha and Malia are huge fans, but boys don't get any ideas. I have 2 words for you: predator drones. You will never see it coming. You think I'm joking?
Administration. How will Obama defend his secret kill list next week at the foreign policy debate?
That's an American citizen that's being targeted without due process of law, without trial, and he's underage, he's a minor.
I would suggest that you should have a far more responsible father if they're truly concerned about the well-being of their children.
You said that he was responsible for these things.
Yes, but again...
Is there going to be any evidence presented?
I don't have anything for you on that.
Do you not see at all, does the administration not see at all how a president asserting that he has the right to kill an American citizen without due process, and that he's not going to even explain why he thinks he has that right, is troublesome to some people? What do you think constitutional law professor Barack Obama would think of this?
I think he spoke about it today.
Then the commander decided that approach was no longer going to work, and he told Rhino he had to either fly the mission or he would go the quote-unquote legal route. So he gave Rhino the order to fly the mission, and Rhino refused. He brought in a witness, he gave Rhino the order to fly the mission, and Rhino refused in front of a witness. Rhino then got an area defense counsel, smart move, and the commander decided that the order should be repeated in writing. I will never forget, ever, sitting at the Red Lobster in Clovis, New Mexico, when we got the call that he needed to go into the boss's office to review this order in writing and sign his refusal in writing. But he did, and it was all handled very calmly and professionally on all sides.
Damage. We also had issues, obviously, concerning lethal force against U.S. citizens.
Addressing any one of these challenges is a tall order. Addressing all of them at once is a monumental task. But that's what the dedicated men and women of the Department of Homeland Security do every day. And today I'm proud to announce my choice to lead them. An outstanding public servant who I've known and trusted for years, Mr. Jay Johnson.
But I personally was terrified. I thought for sure we were headed to a court-martial. I did not know where this was going to end up. After a few months of waiting on pins and needles, well, it felt like a few months, it may have been a few weeks. However, the command decided to issue Rhino a letter of reprimand. That was both good and bad. On the upside, an LOR, Rhino had so many we named our ferret Lors, spelled L-O-R-S. On the downside, an LOR did not resolve anything. It didn't adjudicate the lawfulness of the order. If he'd been given it again, or a similar mission, the cycle would have simply repeated itself. So Rhino decided that the only thing he could do was to resign his commission, even though he had 15 plus years of active duty service at that time. So in the 3 days that you have to respond to an LOR, he filled out also this resignation form that he found online and paperwork, and when he responded to the LOR, he delivered that as well to the squadron commander. And Rhino went for a year, and his security clearance was suspended, and he was taken off the flight line at that time. And he went for a year and worked, and I use that term very loosely, in the CE squadron. Bear in mind, he's a religion major, while we waited to see what would happen. What we did not know is at that time that command, in addition to suspending his clearance, had attempted to permanently revoke it, probably with an eye of a separation thereafter. So we are waiting in limbo. I'm sitting in my office. I get a call. Rhino says, I just had a call, I have to report to the commander's office. I'm not going to lie, my heart sank. In my experience, that call had not led to flowers and roses. So he went in, and a few hours later he called me and he said, the Air Force rejected the command's attempt to revoke my security clearance. They want me out of Cannon as quickly as possible, and they're offering me Korea with a follow-on to the White Jet assignment of my choice. I'm sure my colleagues could hear me yell, take the assignment from down the hall.
Then this other drone pilot veteran was like, no, you weren't.
Well, I just want to clarify first that I'm not a pilot. Was a sensor operator.
And so he made this whole 2-hour documentary just absolutely ruining the life of this veteran who stood up to him. Was like, you didn't do that shit. You're totally pulling that out of your ass.
Here's the part where Houston Wade attributes the false claim to Brandon Bryant, claiming that Bryant stated that I did not refuse to assassinate an American citizen. Unfortunately for Houston Wade, here's Brandon Bryant saying just the opposite.
He also obeyed a command that he felt was wrong, and I feel like that needs to be honored. And one thing about that is I didn't do that. Well, I bitched, but I did it. And I bitched. But I never once said no. And I know where that comes from for me. And I have to say that I admire Rick Rainierson for that.
And so he's been ruining this guy's life. And the guy's like in an institution now as a result of this 2-hour documentary being made that just completely defamed him.
Houston Wade's statement that I defamed Brandon Bryant in my documentary is false, which is why he has no evidence of anything I said being false. Ironically, Wade's claim that Bryant is in an institution is false. Bryant is facing a felony jury trial for threatening to murder multiple individuals in Missoula, Montana, and he was arrested, but he was released and he has not been placed in an institution.
And the stalker guy fell in love with a friend of mine who founded the Japanese internment memorial where I live. So I live on Bainbridge Island, Washington, which is where the Japanese were first rounded up and interned after the bombing of Pearl Harbor and like shipped off to the desert. And so this man is a Japanese ancestry, and his parents and everyone, they were interned in these camps.
Houston Wade is telling the truth when he describes Clarence Morawaki as his good friend. Houston Wade was deeply supportive of Morawaki's unsuccessful effort to get government to silence my speech, and was even in the courtroom supporting Morawaki. Morawaki returned the favor by providing, quote, emotional support, unquote, to Wade when he found himself also in court. Despite the closeness of their relationship, however, Houston Wade's claim that Morawaki's parents were interned by the awful actions of President Roosevelt is incorrect. Morawaki's parents lived outside the exclusion zone and so were not sent to an internment camp.
Yeah, well, I grew up in central Washington, a town called Moses Lake. It's in the middle of the state. It's a lot more like North Dakota than it is western Washington. It's east of the Columbia River, and that's where the line of exclusion was for Washington State. If you were on the west side of the Columbia River, you went and were forced to move away. If you're on the east side, you were not. My father was in Moses Lake at that time, so he was east of the river, and he was not forcibly removed.
And so he got a memorial built at the point where the pier was, where the boat picked him up and took him away. And it's a national monument now. And my stalker was like, oh yeah, no American should be arrested without, due process. This guy's my hero. So in like 2013, he writes this email. It's like, you're the best person in the world. I love you so much. Let's be best friends.
While Houston Wade provides his own inaccurate thespian characterization, it is correct that I sent a supportive email to Morawaki in 2013 thanking him for his work with the memorial. Remember that year, 2013, as it'll be instructive in another false claim from Wade here momentarily.
And my friend was like, thanks for the message, whatever. Well, when this guy gets out of the Air Force 3 or 4 years later, he buys the condo right behind my friend and moves from Texas to that condo in order to become this guy's best friend.
While it's true that in 2016, when I retired from the military, I moved to a condo on Bainbridge Island, Houston Wade lies when he says I did so in order to be near Clarence Morawaki. I purchased that condo in 2011, before I'd even heard the name Clarence Morawaki, and before the 2013 email that Houston Wade brought up, as this public document shows. Since Houston's socialist hosts are unconcerned about asking for evidence, however, they find Houston's false narrative concerning.
Oh my God. Borderline personality disorder weirdness, right? And when he discovers that my friend isn't like a weird libertarian, like he is, and worked for Jay Inslee back in the day as a chief of staff when Inslee was in the House. And he was like, well, Jay Inslee voted for the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act, which allows the government to imprison Americans without due process, which is his own weird interpretation.
What Houston Wade calls my own weird interpretation happens to be an interpretation shared by the ACLU, Dr. Cornel West, socialist intellectual Chris Hedges, and former executive director of the Japanese American Citizen League, Floyd Morey, along with Judge Catherine Forrest, who ruled the indefinite detention provision of the NDAA was unconstitutional in a civil suit brought against the Obama administration by Chris Hedges and several others, a suit that was supported by the children of Fred Korematsu. The provision of the NDAA allowing for the arrest and indefinite detention of American citizens in America without charge or trial is not controversial or a weird interpretation. And even floor debate shows that the Obama administration specifically requested that power apply to American citizens.
And I'm wondering whether the senator is familiar with the fact that the language which precluded the application of Section 1031 to American citizens was in the bill that we originally approved in the Armed Services Committee, and the administration asked us to remove the language which says that U.S. citizens and lawful residents would not be subject to this section. Is the senator familiar with the fact that it was the administration that asked us to remove the very language which we had in the bill which passed the committee, and that we removed it at the request of the administration that would have said that this determination would not apply to U.S. citizens and lawful residents? I'm just wondering, is the senator familiar with the fact that it was the administration which asked us to remove the very language, the absence of which is now objected to by the senator from Illinois?
You should have never signed it into law. Now, a lot of people have been making one last charge. Oh, it's Cenk Uygur and Glenn Greenwald and people like him that actually read bills, and I can't believe they read it. How outrageous, when we should just trust the goodwill of President Obama. But it must be just them, right? They're probably seeing it wrong. That's interesting, because the American Civil Liberties Union has a whole team of lawyers. They all looked at it, and here's their conclusion. Anthony Romero, executive director of the ACLU, says, President Obama's actions today is a blight on his legacy because he will forever be known as the president who signed indefinite detention without charge or trial into law. So what's the next thing? Did the ACLU get it all wrong?
And they want to be able to call the military into the streets and seize American citizens and hold them without due process. You know, Judge Forrest, in her 112-page opinion, when she issued a ruling, brought up the issue of the 110,000 Japanese Americans who were detained during World War II and stripped of due process. as this provision within the NDAA essentially opens the door for that.
Let me say this. Martin Luther King Jr. today could be taken to jail without due process or judicial process under the National Defense Authorization Act.
And put them in federal prison camps, actually prisons, and families knew not where they were sent, and there was no due process. And this is the issue. The issue is that anybody who is on the soil of this great country should be allowed due process guaranteed by the Constitution. And we are now moving back to the dark ages where there are those that feel that we have the right today to eliminate that due process, to forego that due process, forego the Constitution in order to satisfy the whims of those in the military.
But also, so did every person in the House and Senate voted for the 2012 NDAA because it's what funds the military.
Houston Wade is incorrect that every senator and representative voted for the NDAA of 2012. Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Ron Wyden, and a socialist, Bernie Sanders, were among 7 who voted against it in the Senate, and there were others in the House who also voted against the bill. It's noteworthy that Houston's new socialist podcaster friends associated with the group Veterans for Peace find it laughable that anybody would vote against the annual bill that funds the military, despite that bill routinely being used to pass the most egregious military-industrial complex laws that violate our rights under the justification that the bill must be passed because it funds the troops.
Right? And so he's like, he wants my friend to recant. He's like, recant, denounce Janesley, because you now support interning Americans, which is the opposite of your memorial. My friend's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And so this dude starts making all sorts of weird web pages about him and like spamming message boards, about this, about my friend, that he's an un-American, he's evil, and he's for like imprisoning Americans. And I was managing a community Facebook page, a couple of community Facebook pages, and he started spamming about how, my friend is un-American and evil. And I was like, fuck this guy, delete, block. And so thus began him stalking me, because I curtailed his free speech. And now for 4 years, he follows me around the internet. And anytime someone comments on a post, whether it be Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, etc., he responds to them, because he's blocked and he can't respond to me, but he responds to them with the same cut and paste thousands of times a day, over and over. And he's been banned from all the Reddit subreddits, so he made his own that no one pays attention to.
I'm not banned on all the subreddits, and my subreddit, while it's not very large, it certainly gets some attention. Houston Wade himself even posts there, which is ironic given his love of banning viewpoints he disagrees with whenever he has the opportunity. And my subreddit shows that despite Houston's friends downvoting the thread exposing him, still the vast majority who have read that thread have upvoted it. Houston Wade is well aware that most people on Reddit know he is a liar and a fraud.
Shredded on Reddit right now. If I log in there, people hate my guts. Oh man. They're like, he's just a sellout going for likes and subscribes, trying to make a buck off of this. Well, fucking duh. But he can see the Reddits, but he can't respond to anything. So what he does is he individually messages every single solitary person who either mentions my name, comments on a video that someone posted on there, anything I've responded to. So everyone gets these weird DMs with this cut and paste about how I am a loser who lives with roommates and can't be trusted and a liar. And it's bonkers.
I bring up that Houston Wade rents with roommates at 40 years old and is deeply in debt to remind those seeking financial advice that Houston Wade has no credibility in the matter. There's nothing wrong with being a waiter and part-time community college teacher. However, there is a credibility issue when such a waiter presents himself as a market guru, solicits Patreon and Cash App donations, and then makes the incredible claim that he hid $300,000 worth of gems for a treasure hunt to drum up viewers for his YouTube channel. $300,000 he claims he just gave away despite his frequent discussions about not being able to afford a home on Bainbridge Island and being stuck because his truck is broken while he solicits donations to fix it on YouTube, and explaining that his goal for the MOAS is to finally pay off his debt. Only the most gullible person would believe Houston Wade was being honest when he claimed to have given away $300,000 in gems, which he said was suddenly found by an anonymous person who adamantly refuses to talk about this grand treasure hunt adventure on social media. I bring these things up to members of the GME AMC community so that they won't fall for his second treasure hunt, where he's requesting people send him money through a Kickstarter and claims he will take the donations out as cash and put them into a duffel bag to hide for people to find. It doesn't take a waiter or a part-time community college teacher to forecast that any duffel bag filled with cash will likewise find itself discovered by another anonymous person who doesn't want to talk about it. Houston Wade is a fraud, and I expose him in the hope to minimize the damage he does to others with his lies.
So what I just heard was, it's an easy extra listener for us. All we gotta do is send him the recording of this podcast and be like, "Hey, boy, come stalk us now."
It's nuts, and what he likes to post over and over again. So I kind of don't really give a shit about assholes. It's kind of like, if you're a jerk, I'm going to call it out. And a few years ago, I made a website for the community that it put men in my community who had gotten away with horrible abuse and sexual assaults, rapes of women and children in my community. And I was like, these guys have done this stuff. This is his name, his picture, where he lives, his face. And I backed it all up with witness testimony, police evidence, restraining orders, court documents, and two of the guys ended up going to federal prison.
Which had nothing to do with Houston Wade, who was simply sharing links to national news stories about those individuals.
One just kind of disappeared. No one knows where he went. His wife finally came forward and was ready to charge him with abuse, and he just vanished. And then two of the guys decided to sue me for millions of dollars for defamation. Both cases have since been dismissed.
Houston Wade lies that both defamation suits against him were dismissed. In the suit brought against him by a Bainbridge Islander named John DeWars, Houston Wade settled the suit against him and took down his defamatory Facebook attack page called the Bainbridge Island Bad List. He likes to assert that he somehow won when that case was dismissed, but it was only dismissed because Wade settled the suit, and not because of any fault by John DeWars. In the other defamation suit filed against Wade, he falsely claims that it was dismissed. Houston Wade lost that $5 million defamation suit, and he is simply waiting on the court to assess the damages against him.
But I had I filled out, I'm not a lawyer. I'm also not filthy rich, so I had to be my own representation. I filled out an interrogatory wrong and had a ruling against me for filling out this paperwork wrong.
Houston Wade again lies about why he lost the other suit, Bill Nelson v. Wade. He claims it was some innocent mistake in him filling out paperwork wrong that led to him losing the suit. Rather, what happened was Houston Wade, who likes to challenge people to sue him because he says he wants them under oath, refused to answer questions posed to him when he was under oath. During discovery, Wade answered interrogatories with all the gusto of a smart-mouthed 7th grader, providing smart-mouthed non-answers. So Mr. Nelson's lawyers had to go to the judge to get the judge to order Wade to answer the questions. When Wade continued his antics, the court held Wade in contempt and assessed fees against him. Still, Wade refused to answer the questions like an adult and added insult to injury by lying that a prosecutor had told him she was considering criminally charging Nelson. But Wade's attempt at intimidation backfired when the prosecutor filed a signed affidavit with the court, provided the emails between her and Wade, and showed that Wade had lied about her saying she was considering charging Nelson with a crime. As a result of Wade lying under oath, ironically in a civil suit filed against him for alleged lying, and because Wade repeatedly refused to provide contact information for his alleged 60 witnesses, and because Wade continually refused to answer the questions, The court ruled against him, and Wade lost the suit. He claims now that it's been dismissed, but he provides no evidence for that claim, and there are no court documents supporting his claim.
And the stalker likes to post over and over and over again about how I lost a $5 million lawsuit and I'm a liar. And when in actuality, the FBI began investigating the guy who was suing me for child trafficking, and he stopped responding to all the court documents, and the case got dismissed. So, he might be another guy going to federal prison.
Similar to his attempted intimidation by lying about a prosecutor considering charging Bill Nelson with a crime, Wade here makes the unsupported claim that the FBI opened an investigation on Nelson. Apparently, we are to believe that the FBI conducts child trafficking investigations only after ensuring that a deeply in-debt waiter on Bainbridge Island is informed of their investigation. Given that Wade is a mythomaniac who lies profusely, and given that it's extremely unlikely that the FBI would inform Houston Wade of any investigation they're doing, the smart money is that Wade is lying about the FBI investigation. Regardless, there are no court documents supporting Wade's claim that the suit was dismissed even after the court ruled against Wade.
What causes someone to spiral out like this? Like Air Force veteran?
I mean, so he
probably a weird dude while he was in service, but
it was Air Force vets that, like, the Air Force veteran that got shot at January 6th, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's in Air Force has like a slightly higher tendency to like hyper conservative, like Christianism and stuff.
His dad was like a colonel in the Air Force, so that's why he got in.
Houston Wade's claim that my father was a colonel and that's why I got into the military is false. My father was not a colonel and he wasn't an officer. He was an E9 and is now a retired Chief Master Sergeant. And I got into the military because I attended a commissioning course, got a 4-year degree, and was qualified. The military is not some exclusive club.
Went through pilot school, but wasn't good enough to become a fighter pilot, so they had him fly a C-130.
Houston Wade makes the false claim that I wasn't good enough to fly fighters. The Air Force didn't go to Houston Wade's high school to inform him of my progress in Air Force undergraduate pilot training back in 1996, which is why Wade has no evidence, yet again, for his false claim. When I went through pilot training, I was ranked against the others in my class after completing 6 months flying the T-37. Then all the available slots for the various tracks were put in a board. These tracks included the fighter track, the heavy tanker track, the helicopter track, and the C-130 track. The number 1 guy stood up and took his pick. The number 2 guy got to pick from what was remaining. I finished near the top of my class and had every track available to me. I chose not to take the fighter track. So Houston Wade's unsupported claim that I wasn't good enough to fly fighters is unsurprisingly false.
And he was co-pilot on C-130. And he claims he requested flight to become a flight trainer, but really got demoted to become a flight trainer.
Houston Wade's claim that I got quote-unquote demoted to be an instructor pilot demonstrates that Houston isn't familiar with the topic. It is not a demotion to go from a major weapons system to be a UPT instructor pilot. It's a standard way of doing business, and many, like myself, find it a nice break from combat operations. When I volunteered to go teach pilot training, I had spent 5 years flying the AC-130 gunship and had deployed 8 times in the most combat-deployed aircraft in the inventory. I was ready for a break, I wanted to be a UPT instructor pilot, and so I volunteered for that job. It's not unusual, and it's not a demotion. Houston Wade simply doesn't know what he's talking about, not that he's concerned with being truthful.
And then he was giving these weird homework assignments to his trainees that were like, I want you to go read the Constitution and write a 10-page paper on the First Amendment.
This sounds like Killzone.
And the Air Force was like, that's not your job. Your job is to make sure this guy knows how to fly a plane, not write papers to soothe your own weird, Constitution hard-on.
Houston's unsupported claim that I was giving Constitution homework assignments is false, which shouldn't be surprising since he offers no evidence for his false claim.
And so he got demoted from flight training to drone pilot.
Likewise, Houston Wade's claim that I was demoted to drone pilot is false. I volunteered for the drone program. Ironically, because I had challenged leadership at the pilot training base I was stationed at, they tried to take away the assignment to go fly UAVs. but I reached out to one of my former commanders in the special operations community, and he made sure I got the assignment. Then my boss informed me that I got the assignment I had volunteered for. Here's some audio from my personal stash when my boss, who had tried to turn off the assignment, notified me that I got the assignment.
Hey, Ryan. Hey, I got a notification. I just got back today that you got matched. So you're going to go to Canada.
Oh,
Q9s.
sweet.
So,
for UAVs?
Yes.
Awesome.
MQ9. So I have no essay on it at all on how that transpired. All I got was a message saying you're good to go. So late summer.
Awesome.
So,
late summer.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I don't
maybe
have a
does
date.
that mean like leaving?
But if you're
does that mean being there in late summer?
Yeah.
So I'm just day now.
It's reporting no later than late summer. So that's what
Awesome.
I was notified. But again, it was a phone call. So I would expect something to hit fairly quickly.
Gotcha.
There you go. Well, actually, again, the note said I wrote down AFSOC because they're the ones that made that request.
Good.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, well done. I'll when I hear something, I'll just upload it to you.
Thanks, sir.
By this time, we had moved on to Cannon. Now, you might be thinking that an RPA assignment at Cannon was Laughlin leadership's punishment for what had gone on, but you would be wrong. Rhino actually volunteered for Cannon. He volunteered for RPA because he sees that as the future of the Air Force, and he wanted to put his money where his mouth is and help the mission and not just participate in a fun flying club. And ironically, because he wanted to do it, Laughlin leadership actually tried to turn it off. And they offered us Davis-Monthan. Gee, who wouldn't want Tucson over Clovis, New Mexico, am I right? But because of the mission, Clovis it was, and so Clovis we went.
Then he got demoted from drone pilot to co-drone pilot.
Yeah, drone co-pilot might be something they do in Call of Duty, but that doesn't exist in the real world. I've corrected Houston Wade on his false claim that I was demoted to drone co-pilot. That is a position that does not exist except inside the head of Houston Wade. The MQ-9 Reaper drone, like all Air Force drones, only has one pilot, but I'll let Houston's friend Brandon Bryant explain that fact.
You're basically saying that drone operators are not pilots, am I correct?
No, there is a pilot, but there's two people that fly these things, and one is a pilot and one is not, and I was the not.
So what does the not do exactly?
Then he got demoted from drone pilot to having no security clearance, flying a desk, and being followed around by MPs. And that's kind of where he got left off with the Air Force.
This claim that I was followed by MPs is false, and Wade presents no evidence for it. And where I got left off is having the Air Force fined for me during the incident when I refused to assassinate an American citizen, followed by being offered a plum assignment for a year in Korea, followed by the White Jet, i.e. Instructor Pilot and Training Command, assignment of my choice, where I chose to fly T-6s over the beaches of Florida for 3 years before I retired.
And was basically blackballed from promotion.
You said his dad was a colonel, right? I wonder how much of this is his own dad's slightly better repressed conspiracism. You know?
I don't know.
Like if his dad's
I do
colonel,
think
I imagine that he's got all kinds of weird theories. He's got like all kinds of just weird latent conservatism, and probably did a slightly better job at hiding it, but then all of that stuff imprinted onto his kid who just didn't have the maturity to not be a psycho.
Definitely not. And I think, you know, if you're flying a drone 18 hours a day and you're just pressing buttons, watching people blow up, that there is a whole bunch of PTSD in there. Like these drone pilots are so disconnected from their actions that their subconscious has a real hard time processing it.
Not only did I only fly drones for 2 or 3 years out of my 20-year career, my primary aircraft was one where I was not disengaged from reality of what I was doing. It should also be noted that Houston Wade has no experience with combat or the military, and he is a deeply in-debt waiter and part-time community college teacher, not a medical professional. I do not have PTSD, nor have I ever claimed to have it. Houston Wade and his friends have made that false claim multiple times while they try to use my service against me and paint me as a broken war veteran and thus a danger, but it is not true.
And I think a lot of his, if I analyze him with my 1/4 of psychology, I would say that it's a control issue. That he wants to have control of some situation that's out of control. And, you know, he's still lobbing these bombs from afar. He won't, like, when he was being a pain in the ass to me a couple years ago, I was like, hey, Washington State is a mutual combat state. Let's just kick each other's ass. And
Is that real?
Got in his van and never came back. Yeah.
Houston Wade spins this fantasy in his head. Not only had I long left Bainbridge Island for the Florida Keys when he posted this disturbed invitation to fight him on a Facebook page rather than to me directly, but I also had ongoing litigation with his good politician friend Clarence Morawaki, which stemmed from Morawaki's false claims that I was physically stalking him, bolstered by claims from Houston Wade and others in their little group that I was a mentally ill combat veteran about to snap, that I had a weapons cache, and that I was a danger to the community. Houston Wade is fond of inviting people on social media to fight him in mutual combat, and he's made about a half dozen such invitations over the last few years alone. Since we're talking psychology now, I'll mention that I suspect the same mechanism that leads to Houston's delusions of being an astrophysicist and a former pro baseball player and CEO of a mining company and reality TV star in a show that doesn't exist is likely the same mechanism that leads him to make these invitations to fight. Houston Wade is nothing if not a person victim to self-delusion.
Like if you both agree to fight,
doing the
do whatever the hell you
fucking
want
10
to each
paces, turn and shoot.
Yeah, just beat the shit out of each other. And I was like, I'm twice your size. I'm gonna beat the shit out of your roly-poly ass.
I demand a trial by combat.
And he got in his van and just disappeared. He's not been back to the island in 4 years.
As usual, this claim from Houston Wade that I left because of his challenge to mutual combat is false, as is his claim that I haven't been back to the island in the last 4 years. Not only have I been back to the island, but I even published videos of me on the island.
Something that you said earlier, though, kind of like rings true. The fact that he doesn't have any agency over his own life. He's part of a greater war machine that really doesn't give a shit about him. He's just pressing buttons and ruining lives and receiving a whole shitload of PTSD over it. Probably feels like there has to be something that explains why everything sucks. And he settled on...
I don't think he has the cognitive ability to acknowledge any of this. He just pushes it down. And, you know, what he needs is a bunch of Thorazine and Zoloft and someone to talk to about it. Because all he spends his time is on the internet 18 hours a day tweeting at me.
Not only is Houston Wade being hyperbolic here, suggesting I spend 18 hours a day criticizing him, but he's also completely incorrect when he says I tweet at him. I don't tweet at him. I never tweet to him. Rather, I tweet about him to other people. That's a key difference. I criticize him
100 times an hour.
God.
He's been doing it for years.
So there's a good chance he's listening to this, right? Or will listen.
Definitely.
He's listening to this right now.
He'll find
as we're
this.
recording.
He will stalk all three of you now, and that's he'll be like, Houston Wade's a liar. I was not. My security clearance wasn't removed. And you're like, whatever, dude. Like,
well,
you're bonkers.
If he was a pilot, that means he was an officer, right? Like,
yep.
So
he ended up being a major, but he was stuck at major for a long time.
Perfect.
Because
all right.
never got beyond that.
Do we three here, the Pillow Scream team, have anything we'd like to say to Major Fucknuts?
Major Tom.
Since he's listening. Yeah. What do we want to say? What do we want to register with this triggered individual?
PYFYS.
I'll say it feels a lot better to be a socialist. All right? Like, try it out. Then we can actually account for the way things are messed up by a description of historical materialism and class politics. I'd love to talk your ear off about it. But, you know, if you're committed to 15-year-old version of libertarianism, feel free. I know more than you. All right, let's talk about it.
I think it also pains him that my sister outranks him by far.
What's clear here is that it pains Houston Wade that his socialist podcaster friends don't share his view that being a major is somehow a negative. So he has to double down by mentioning his sister, who I've never heard of and know nothing about.
I was going to say, one, I've never met a cool major ever. Every single major has always been a piece of shit who I hated.
That's so true. They just ceded their life to. They're just like, I'm a field grade now.
State of mind.
This is the best Houston Wade's going to get from his new socialist friends on the irrelevant rank issue, given that they obviously didn't share his thought that being a major was some sort of an insulting factor. They mentioned they've never met a major that they didn't hate, leaving out the fact that their interactions with majors likely didn't extend much beyond saying yes sir or yes ma'am. Regardless, this isn't going to help Wade, who's hoping for a personalized message of hate directed at me, rather than this less personalized message of hating superior officers that they had to work for by people who are so concerned with class dynamics.
For one, yeah, take this part of my hair, take the top of my hair, and then give me more alcohol so I can...
Well, that does his 4 arrests are due to heavy drinking.
Oh, no.
And fighting cops. So
Houston Wade finishes the podcast as he started with a false claim. Here, falsely claiming that I've been arrested 4 times. Perhaps he's counting the non-arrest on video by the Border Patrol that occurred in Wade's head. I'm not sure where he gets the rest. He provides no evidence for his false claim, nor does he mention that he only knows of 1 arrest involving alcohol, and that was one where I was arrested by a lying cop in a bar after drinking 1 beer because I dared ask a cop why he was threatening to arrest my friend, another pilot in the squadron, for using profanity. And of course, Houston doesn't mention that I represented myself against that cop in court and I won.
Poor guy. Yeah. We can solve all your problems. I'll grab some shrooms. We'll go out into the redwoods. We'll just have a really good soul-searching experience, and you'll come out the other side a lot better.
Was my suggestion was like he needs to take a whole bunch of psilocybin, and just
chill the fuck out,
confront his subconscious, and get that like dragon out of him. I don't know.
Yeah, I redact my comments. I'd actually like to just drop a bunch of acid with you. Hit me up.
Well, I'll conclude by thanking the socialist podcasters for the invitation to do drugs with them. But might I suggest that instead of altering reality, given your inability to grasp reality, perhaps less shrooms and LSD might be a better choice? You see, you sat there with a court-ruled liar for quite some time, and while you were provided the evidence that he was a liar before the podcast, you still were unable to figure out that you were being lied to. Not once did you ask him for evidence or push back on his insane claims that a military officer was a white supremacist neo-Nazi. Instead, you sat there and giggled. I suspect your inability to wrestle with reality and make sense of it explains why you bill yourselves as supporters of Veterans for Peace, while at the same time giggling like schoolgirls over the story of me standing up to the war machine by refusing an unlawful order, and sneering at the inaccurate depiction of me exercising my rights at a DHS checkpoint and using the legal system in my attempt to check the power of government overstepping. Your Twitter account follows several unsavory individuals, including Sean Westmoreland, another Veterans for Peace guy, and a fraud who I have exposed. And so your newfound relationship with Houston Wade isn't surprising in the least. It is clear to me that you lack principle. Like Brandon Bryant, Sean Westmoreland, and Houston Wade, you seem to be part of the growing group of Americans who are completely detached from reality, who deluded themselves into thinking that they're intellectuals and flock to socialism, not with the principle of socialists like the great Chris Hedges, but rather with all the intellectual force of somebody going to a rave. I support your freedom to do drugs, but I won't be joining you. I do appreciate the invitation, though. Cheers.